Science Foundation supported research network of networks. It brings together researchers exploring nature-based solutions in urban areas across the world. So thanks so much for joining us. We have webinars typically once a month. We have two speakers today. The first will be from Rebecca Snyder at Trinity College, Dublin. We'll be talking a little bit about her work on exploring trait-based approaches in Dublin and beyond. And then we'll pause and switch over to a second speaker who will be discussing their experiences as students in the urban resilience and regenerative solutions, water, green spaces, and environmental risk in the community identified of South Bogotá. This will include Min-Venditti and Daniella Rivera-Agudelo from the RULES program. Great.
Actually, Chris, I think we only have May, so they're the only ones presenting today. And when we're done with Rebecca's presentation, I'll say a little bit to introduce May.
Cool. And just a reminder, we have an all-hands meeting coming up in February. Very exciting. We'll be at the Florida International University in Miami, Florida. So if you haven't reached out already, please let us know if you'd like to join us. We have some limited availability in spots, so we do need to get the registration shaped up soon. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. Rebecca, you're on and ready to go?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you should be able to share your screen, or Nancy can provide the access.
Perfect. 1 second. Okay. Get make sure I have up and working. Okay. Got it. Making sure I'm sharing the correct screen here. So, okay. Oops. There's that. And can you all see pretty well? I just want to make sure I'm using. Okay. Great. Okay. So thank you everybody for joining me today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with the Early Career Fellowship. My name is Rebecca Snyder. For those of you that don't know, I am a second-year PhD student in the School of Life Sciences at Arizona State University. I have been participating in NATURA this last year. I'm in Nancy Graham, who's on the call, is one of my advisors. And I've been working with the Ecological Resilience Thematic Working Group, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. And so I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I applied for this fellowship and got accepted and went to Trinity College in Dublin in Ireland for 6 weeks over this during the summer. And I was very fortunate to be part of a great group, the Novel Eco team, led by Marcus Collier in the botany department at Trinity College. So I really got to know that team quite well, as well as others in the botany department while I was there. And so it was really an excellent opportunity for me. Given that this was came at the end of the first year of my PhD, I was very much in the mindset of still kind of figuring out my precise research direction. And so the primary overarching objective for this was to kind of explore some different methods that other groups working on nature-based solutions are using, particularly on traits. So I got to kind of explore methods using field-based methods, but also some participatory methods, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. But then I also really wanted to build on the progress that we've made on a literature review on traits, which I'll also touch on further, and to kind of use these experiences to further hone my research questions that I'm exploring for my dissertation. And then also, of course, kind of building this professional network while I was there to kind of bounce ideas off of individuals kind of interested in similar things. And I was very fortunate to be there at a time when there was the European Climate Change Adaptation Conference was taking place. So it's this big conference bringing together academics, working professionals, policymakers, all working on climate change adaptation in Europe in Dublin. So I attended that conference and got to kind of sit in on a bunch of different talks on, you know, everywhere from managing urban heat island effects to coastal adaptation. And it was great because there was an entire section on nature-based solutions, almost about half a day. So I got to see a bunch of different examples and meet a lot of people working on that. So, but then one of the great things was that for that conference, some of my collaborators on this literature review were actually there in person for the conference. So I got to connect with them face to face, which was really great. So I know some of you on this call may not be familiar with this literature review that's taking place on traits. As part of the ecological resilience working group that I'm a part of through NATURA. So just to give you some background, what we're really trying to kind of learn from this literature review is what kinds of traits in the literature have been identified as contributing to ecological resilience within urban spaces. And then from that, we're also kind of exploring some other questions around, you know, trade-offs between traits that confer resilience and other ecosystem services. So for this literature review, we're using a systematic approach. So we, while there, we finished our initial keyword search in Google Scholar and Web of Science. And then while I was in Dublin, we also completed our initial screening. So we went through and eliminated articles that didn't meet the search criteria. So for example, if they were review papers rather than empirical papers, if they weren't in urban areas, or if they were focused on other types of traits like psychological traits that was outside of the scope of this review. So we completed this initial screening, and then we also tagged papers based on taxonomic groups. So though we kind of through our group discussions, we decided that it would be really useful to have this database of different taxonomic groups and their traits, but within our specific kind of literature review group, we have specific interest in plant traits. And so we decided for the purposes of our initial manuscript to focus specifically on plants. So that hence why we did this kind of tagging exercise, and we're able to limit the scope of our kind of in-depth review to a couple hundred papers focused on plant traits. And
Rebecca,
then, yes.
Excuse me. Are you advancing slides? Because if you are, we're not seeing them advance.
Oh no, I am.
Okay,
and,
I just
okay.
I had a feeling.
Thank you for flagging.
Yes.
Okay. Shoot. Is it here? Is this?
We only saw the title slide. We only saw the title slide. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I've used. Okay. Sorry about that.
Right now I see the traits literature review. That's okay. I knew you had slides and I was sort of waiting for them to start.
Oh no. I'm using Canva, and I've used Canva before successfully, but I guess you never know. Sometimes okay.
So we're on right now. We're seeing traits literature review.
Okay, great. Okay, and that's all you see. You're just seeing it's full screen right now.
That's all we see. Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Okay. Let me just get back here. Okay, so yes, we then also worked to develop an initial data extraction form. So identifying the fields based on our kind of initial research questions. So identifying fields that we want to extract information on. And we've continued to iterate on this, but we developed the first draft while I was abroad in Dublin. And then, like I said, I got to meet my collaborators. Here's two of them, Mairead and Philippa. And Mairead is a grad student within the Novel Eco team in Dublin. So it was great to spend time with her and meet Philippa as well in person. Wish our other collaborators could have been there too, but I heard that they some of them got to meet at the ESA conference that I wasn't able to attend. So I'm glad that others were able to kind of meet up in person in a different meeting. But just to kind of emphasize the value of this in-person experience, you know, we got to connect more informally and like get to know one another, which I just think is good for overall team morale and kind of keeping the momentum going on this review, because literature reviews like this can be, you know, they're time intensive. There's a lot of iteration involved, and so kind of keeping that team cohesiveness is really important. And then we also kind of talked about next steps for this review, like what our tentative plan is for the coming year, looking out to the all hands meeting next year, like where we want to be by then. So I think it was really great to have a chance to meet up with them. Just confirming, the slide did advance just now, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, they did.
Good. Okay, good. So also with this review, while I was in Dublin, I explored kind of a particular area of interest of mine regarding traits, which is intra-specific variation. I've been told I need to emphasize that intra part, so nobody gets confused. So this basically means, you know, variation of traits within a species. So either between populations of the same species or individuals of the same species. I got interested in this because I read a couple papers that pointed towards how intraspecific variation can be important for resilience. And in fact, there are some projects out there that are kind of trying to utilize intraspecific variation. So for example, planting of forests using seedlings from more southern populations, with the idea being that more southern populations are maybe heat tolerant. So planting them in northern areas that are expected to get hotter in the coming future. Land managers are hoping to that these forests will then be more resilient in the future. So this was kind of a reason why I wanted to investigate this further. So while I was in Dublin, I did some of my own kind of more informal literature review and found that intraspecific trait variation really remains an under-researched aspect of community ecology and just generally trait-based approaches. So these were a couple of review articles that I read, meta-analyses, and many trait databases like the TRI database only provide mean values for species, which can be kind of limit our ability to do large scale analyses on kind of intraspecific variation. And then also some interesting studies finding how important that interspecific variation likely plays a really significant, can play a significant role in ecosystem resilience. But notably, this depends on the source of variation. So plasticity, for example, can produce very different effects on resilience compared to underlying genetic variation. So plasticity being the ability of an organism to kind of change to change in response to, you know, environmental stressors without the underlying genetic kind of components changing. So I thought these were kind of interesting areas, and so I was curious to see how well represented this topic was in the literature we extracted for the kind of ecological resilience traits literature review. And so I did a kind of preliminary analysis and found very few papers from what I've seen so far address this ecological, or address this interspecific trait variation question. But I thought it was interesting. So one of these meta-analyses found that interspecific variation accounted for 25% of trait variation within communities and 32% of the total trait variation among communities on average. So I mean, those are pretty significant numbers, and I just thought I'd be curious to see kind of what the latest research is on this, given that was a 2015 study. But, you know, all of this is very desktop research oriented, and really I wanted to kind of get out into the field and see what, you know, the team in Dublin was doing, see what kind of systems they're working within, and what it would look like to actually do research on traits in person on the ground. So I joined the Novel Eco team. Here, a couple of them down here. There's Mairead and Anna, and they brought me to one of their field sites in Dublin. So it's an urban wild space and a novel ecosystem, which I'll chat more about as well, where they're doing timed transects. And I was very interested in this concept of a timed transect. Basically, for 1 hour, they would record the species or genus that was observed, and then later would kind of look up those species in the TRI database to see which traits they're associated with. So it was kind of a way to more efficiently collect information kind of indirectly on the traits that are likely present, rather than through direct observation of the traits, which can take a long time. And this timed transect was a approach that was being piloted by the Novel Eco team as a way to kind of address some of the limitations or some of the challenges of working in cities where they're highly heterogeneous. There's high heterogeneity, and so kind of distance interval type transects are not as good at getting kind of representative samples. And so this was kind of a method that they were exploring. So I was very excited to get to kind of see how this worked in person. And I also kind of took this and went out and experimented with this timed transect approach in other locations around Dublin. So to kind of see how it would work, where the challenges were. I was particularly interested in how, you know, it's kind of how the results, how traits might vary between these different green spaces within Dublin that had different kind of overarching objectives to their management. So the Novel Eco team is specifically looking at unmanaged wild spaces, novel ecosystems. But then there are other green spaces within the city where with explicit objectives. So for example, there was the Phoenix Park that has explicit biodiversity conservation objectives. But then I also did some background reading of the climate adaptation plans of Dublin and found a couple dedicated nature-based solutions. These were the Dodder and Tolka River greenways that are have explicit flood mitigation objectives. So I went to these different areas to kind of see how kind of they're managed differently and kind of what the implications are for the traits that exist there. So yeah, that was those were some kind of, they were helpful for getting me used to some potential methods I could use for my dissertation. But also, in addition to these kind of more field-based, like urban ecology field methods, I also got exposed to more participatory methods that Mairead is using in her research. So I assisted with a workshop held in an abandoned lot within Dublin's urban core. And while there, we were eliciting perspectives from different, from a community group on their kind of perceptions of this urban wild space, what they envision for its future, but also their observations of the traits that are present within this space and how they value them. And unfortunately, I don't have pictures of the workshop itself because my phone was being used to record the conversations that were happening. So I was not able to take photos during it, but
that's okay, Rebecca. Thanks so much. We're gonna have to switch over to Ame soon. Do you want to?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, I'm going. Yeah, I'll just go ahead. I have one more slide. So yeah, I'll just kind of go forward. So the participatory methods were very interesting. It kind of highlighted how there are different ways of valuing the urban wild spaces or just urban green spaces and the traits that exist there. So some takeaways, there's specific limitations of working in cities. So there's high rates of hybridization. So kind of looking at this intraspecific variation is very difficult. And my main focus of my research, I really want it to be useful for real world applications and policy. So, and then also just broadly speaking, this question of like trade-offs between different traits and the benefits they provide. This is something that's kind of helped to shape my research interest. And I'll stop there. I'm sorry to take up too much time. So, but final thank you to the Novel Eco team and specifically Marcus Collier, who was my mentor while I was there. So thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
That was really great, Rebecca.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Chris, we need to start right at 10:30 with the next one, right? So there might be time for one question. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
If anyone has one question you'd like to ask. Okay. All right. Well, let me take those 3 minutes to just say a word about, so especially for people who are interested in sort of early career opportunities, we have obviously one that Rebecca took advantage of, which is the 6-week fellowship, and that is so I think it's a super opportunity for someone who's in a position of just formulating their ideas for their dissertation. We also through Natura have another program that is called the Research in Urban Latin America International Research Experience for Students, or RULA-ARIS program that is it's unfortunately limited to US citizens, but it's directed at graduate and undergraduate students. And Min-Venditti is here to tell us about this past summer's experience, where they were part of the team that worked in Bogotá, Colombia, and they'll tell us more about that in just a minute. But I wanted to put in a plug while I have the stand here for this upcoming summer. We will be sending a group of students similar to the group that Ame will introduce to you to Mérida, Mexico, and Yucatan. And the students there will be working on a team science project that may end up being similar or might end up being quite different from the one that you're just about to hear about. But watch the NATURA website under opportunities for upcoming informational webinar on the Mérida RULA-ARIS, as well as how to apply for that. So with that, I just wanted to make sure that you all are aware of these opportunities. Watch the website as well for any future opportunities for fellows like Rebecca's. There might be one or two, I'm not sure what the budget looks like for this final year of NATURA, but I think there might be one or two available. So with that, I want to introduce Ame Min-Venditti and let her take it away. Ame. Sorry.
Good morning, I'm Ame Min-Venditti, and as Nancy said, I was one of multiple participants in the RULA-ARIS experience in Bogotá this past summer. I'm going to share my screen and make sure you guys can see it. Can you see slides?
Yes, but in presented mode.
Okay, let's see. How do I? That's weird.
If you just, I think there's an opportunity to just, there's a little thing up at the top that'll say swap displays. You may be able to do that.
Okay, so I should be sharing.
Yeah, now we're seeing
one slide and then.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so the other people listed here are my co-researchers. As Nancy said.
Now we see your. Now we see your notes. I'm not sure why.
I don't understand because I just shared one screen, but
now we see the slide.
I mean, it just has all my notes on it, but that's fine.
No, we don't see your notes now, but we did when you changed it.
I know. I'm saying, like, I won't be able to look at them, I guess. I don't really know how that's.
I think you don't have to full screen the one you're sharing, and so maybe you can make it smaller. Oh, maybe not. Never mind. Sorry, I thought it was in Canva as well. So.
It's okay.
Never mind.
I'll just talk through it. I know what we did. So there were 6 of us, and we were all in different fields. Well, not all of us, but we ranged fields from sustainability to urban studies to freshwater science, and my particular interest is in water narratives. And we studied a lot of different aspects of what makes up urban resilience in communities in the south of Bogotá. So for those of you who aren't familiar, we'll be talking about, like, what does it mean? What does the south of Bogotá even mean? Like, we all had to get oriented in the months leading up to our project, but then also getting on the ground is a whole nother thing, which was part of what we gained from this experience. So we'll briefly go over what we did and then, like, some of our takeaways. So again, Bogotá is a large city, high altitude, about 12 million people. And these are some maps. This is Google Maps of the territory. Here in the middle is a very common style of map that is the different neighborhoods in Bogotá. The 3 that I've circled are the 3 we worked in. And then the map on the right comes from the Bogotá municipal mapping database. And you can see these territories actually span quite far to the south based on what the maps say. So it's actually really interesting because almost all the maps show them as smaller or similar size to the other neighborhoods, but in reality they extend very far and have a lot of rural interfaces as well as urban spaces. So I'm not going to go through everything here, but basically this is demonstrating how complicated the landscape was in terms of groups, people, actual physical spaces. This photo here is a Google Maps representation of what it would be called a quebrada, either like a ravine or a green area that's sort of steep and adjacent to urban lands, and there's usually a stream there. So a lot of these pieces of like urban infrastructure, and then what we, green or natural spaces, those are some of the pieces that we were looking at in our study. So I'm going to go through like how we started to think about our background, what we ended up doing, and then touch on these themes of water, environmental risk, green space, and then what we're calling autonomy and identity, but that was related a lot to the resilience piece. So again, these were our key topics. There were 3 main studies, and just keeping in mind we did this all in 8 weeks with a team of 6 plus 2 co-investigators from our community. We did a photo voice study. I took lead on that with Michael Ramirez, and this was carried out across the 3 locations in San Cristobal, Usme, and Ciudad Bolivar. Lauren Emer and Eduardo Vargas did a water study in Usme on water quality and perceptions, and then a risk and green space study was conducted primarily in San Cristobal with some counter mapping. I think I just mentioned most of what we used in terms of methods, but there were definitely interviews and community consultation that was really important, as Rebecca was talking about. Participatory methods. We did some participatory mapping as part of our methods, but I think we were all very eager to work on a co-created research project, or one that was focused on community needs and making sure that we were aligning what we were doing with what had already been happening in the landscape. So in that sense, we were trying to be thoughtful. When Nancy visited and when Matt was there as well, we did a lot of meetings with the community leaders and with our collaborators at the NGOs and universities, and that helped us like check as we went periodically to make sure what we were doing made sense. So again, I mentioned the photo voice method. This method comes from social work and participatory action research, and basically you give people, well, you start with a semi-structured interview to build rapport and get to know people if you don't already have those contacts, and then give people a photo mission, which is basically, please take photos in the next 2 weeks or so about this topic and how it relates to your life, in your daily life. After that, we have a table of photos, and I did them in focus groups, but you can do individual interviews to sort of debrief the key themes of the photos and use them as artifacts to elicit more information about the topics of interest. So as you can see, 200 photos were submitted, but in the end, we narrowed them down to about 27 on these 4 themes that were really illustrative. So I'm going to have those interspersed throughout. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go, or we can get to them at the end. So the first theme that we talked about, water, basically we found that the theme of water and water providing life and nurturing life was really important to people in different ways. All these different types of ecosystems, wetlands, the páramo, which is like the highland, plains, peatlands sort of, and then in urban areas having these green spaces with water, the dependency that people had in their gardens, and then this perception of water quality are the biggest themes that came up. So again, this is a picture of the páramo, that highland. And then here's some more photos of water in the garden and stormwater. And so those are pretty evocative of this region. So these 3 localities started out as informal settlements, and I think, as those of you who are working like the informality working group are aware, and like that's kind of where we focused. The Santa Librada tributary is located in Usme, which is one of those 3. On the photo on the right, you can see this open pit mine. I think it's gravel mostly that's been extracted, and you can also see how the water looks in this area. And so pretty active social ecological system. Lauren did interviews, like surveys along this tributary, as well as taking water quality samples, and made this infographic at the end, basically showing how things change from point A to point E. It's all in Spanish, but basically at the top, the numbers you see here, 91, pretty low. It gets a lot higher. And there were some quotes, and basically the perceptions of the stream match pretty well the water quality shifts in coliforms and nitrates and phosphates. So wish I could go into more detail, but I think some of the important things that, other than that understanding that people already kind of knew what was going on and they had that sense, was the variety, the diversity of perceptions that people had. Again, like viewing it just as a resource, viewing it as kin, like there's this broad different types of knowledge. And one of the things that someone said was the quebrada is the entire neighborhood. The idea of like being inextricably connected with the water system and the community itself. So I think that impacted me as well, because I am interested in the water. From this perspective, we were able to see, like in all of the communities, how closely people live with the nature that's right around, like, and interspersed with their homes. That kind of leads to the next topics, which were environmental risk and green space. So again, you can kind of see here how the community, or this is in Usme as well, it has been developing into the rural, like agricultural border of the city. And some of the themes that came up in the photos were risks such as landslides, flooding, but also risks of invasive species. This photo in particular is of an invasive species in the foreground. And in this study, part of our team did a lot of interviews and it was focused in San Cristobal, participatory mapping, and overlaid with government maps on risk designations. Obviously, a lot of other data was used as well, and this also happened in dialogue with IDIHER, which is the Bogotá, let's see, Climate Change and Risk Management agency, I believe. So again, to sort of situate, this is on the sort of southeast side of the city, and Las Amapolas is very close to sort of the green area, so it's very high up. And the case that people were looking at was this proposed high-rise that's probably actually got a few floors already set, because while we were there, it went from, it was basically in this phase of being about to be built. And the conflict that's happening there is that this development is happening despite being in a high-risk zone. And the results that people found on our team, this is so brief, it's so hard to summarize, but basically where you see these stars, that's where new construction, including that high rise, are being cited, and everything that's colored as light red or dark red are both classified as medium or high risk, respectively, by the government. So the like kind of gray squares are homes that are being people who are being removed or resettled from their homes because they're in high risk zones. So the irony of this, like the obvious power structures in place, were something that our team brought to the attention of that agency and actually presented multiple times. And again, don't have too much time to go too much in depth about this, but green spaces are kind of this big resilience factor that we saw throughout all of these different topical areas. This is a garden in one of the communities in Ciudad Bolívar, and this idea of like spaces of learning, spaces of interdependence, spaces of growth came up. So we saw a lot of different ecological restoration movements that were kind of coalescing in these spaces. Here's the garden again along one of those quebradas, and like there was a lot of talk of environmental services, and kind of that rural urban border again. So the final kind of piece we have was, I guess, related to like the social resilience piece of broadly urban resilience. We asked people about autonomy and identity, and what we meant by that was show us about this like sense of belonging, the place you're from in territory. And these are some of the themes that came up, was about like food sovereignty, again, those gardens as a site of organization, and resilience and empowerment in the community, and the importance of other ways of knowing, again, art and culture and expressive connections. So while we were there, there was a protest trying to protect one of the mountainous areas. This idea of saying no to neo-extractivist projects, like this is happening a lot in these areas. In Ciudad Bolívar, one of the 3 communities, 89% of all the mines for gravel and sand in Bogotá are in that community, when it only has about 7% of the population. So this, environmental justice, like not in so many words, but that came up several times as well. And these are sort of catalyzing forces where people will organize, as well as, again, this is yet another community garden, where people are coming together to paint something that says building barrio, so like building community, building neighborhood. So that importance was really clear, understanding that the huertas, these gardens, are part of what can be the future, to provide lots of environmental and social benefits. Let's see here. In the end, you've kind of seen, as I've just sped along, some of the things that we've created, including some maps, including some of the photos that we put together, and some of those dialogues. So a couple of those examples, we had more academic dialogue at the Universidad de La Salle. I mentioned them by name, but they were our hosts. Multiple professors gave us a lot of guidance and resources and were incredibly welcoming to us. And they hosted this event where we also welcomed people from the governmental agencies and the communities. And then we also went to the communities and presented at a public location there. And finally, we were fortunate to have our photo voice exhibit in a museum in the community of Ciudad Bolívar. So there's a museum called the Museum of the Self-Constructed City, which is part of the City Museum network. And this is an example of some of the people who took the photos explaining what they meant in more detail. So this was up for 2 weeks, and we actually had public sticky notes that came in over the 2 weeks. And so this was for me, this was really special, because as an academic at the beginning of my career as a second-year PhD student now, it's like pretty rare that you get to put together an exhibit in a museum as part of your outreach on your research. So we of course came up with some ideas for the future. Hopefully they'll be implemented, but strengthening institutional support and pathways for people to become involved in public processes, pedagogy, so education, a lot of environmental education requests, and the importance of that was stressed by so many community members. And then this idea of like belonging and sense of place that goes along with environmental consciousness. And with that, I kind of want to just say thank you so much to all the people who helped us, especially Michael and Eduardo, who were other researchers that helped our team. So with that, any questions?
Thank you, Ame. Wonderful. Questions?
Hi, Ame. I have a question. My name is Helen. I am interested in the program for 2024, so I wanted to attend this webinar to hear more about the experience this summer. I'm curious about how you felt received in the communities that you were working with, and were there any kind of dynamics that you had to work through at the beginning that kind of allowed for deeper trust between you and the people you were working with?
Great question. Yes, that was very important to us. So we were very fortunate to work with Duban Lopez, who I think is pretty active in the Natura network, who just finished his PhD and was also a former government official and started an NGO in Bogotá, and has been working with a lot of the key participants and collaborators we worked with in these communities for over 10 years. So we were very fortunate to have that background. And the first couple of weeks we were there, he was with us and introduced us and brought us to the territories. That made a huge difference. I'm not sure exactly how that'll be in Mérida, but I know that was one of the key things I noticed was anytime he would walk in the room, like even people, like their faces would change, like they would be animated in different ways because there was that long trust. So I don't think we could have done it without that, for sure. And that said, people always say this, but I think the important thing was that we just showed up. So like it takes about an hour by public transit to get to these parts of town, and going to public events, like going to farmers markets, going to things that people were doing, and just like being there, like getting to know people, talking, like that was really important to building trust as well. So I mean, it's definitely a really rushed timeline, and I had to gloss over like all of the team struggle stuff, but like I think just being willing to be there, like that's the biggest thing to help.
That's a great answer. I mean, I think it's a really good observation, and I think what we try to do in these a lot of these programs is to work with people who have a long history and some experience with the communities that we're trying to work with, because just sort of dropping in out of nowhere is problematic in a lot of cases, so establishing those relationships with people who have relationships with the communities that you want to work with is really important. Anyone else have a question about the research that they did, or the program, anything like that?
I have a few questions.
Okay.
Can you tell us a bit about the methods that you guys applied? I see you have applied a range of different methods, including the photo voice. Can you tell us a bit more what you think worked a bit better? What do you think you got more results from?
Yeah. Yeah, we did sort of mix methods. I think people's interests kind of dictated that a little. So our freshwater scientist, Lauren, really wanted to do water quality sampling. And in the end, we did manage to make that happen, but it was a lot harder than expected. So I would say the types of methods that are flexible, like they don't require minimum sample or something like that, things where especially when you're starting a new study like this, when we don't have the context, even if it's there, like we did a lit review, we did research before getting there, but being on the ground is different. And so things where we know we're being there in an exploratory sense, like we're not necessarily, we have a hypothesis, we're gonna prove it. And so things that work well with that sort of inductive kind of model helped in our case. So these like semi-structured interviews helped a lot, and that's something where with IRB, that's one thing I wish we had done earlier was try to get that ready for IRB. Nancy put counting plants. Yeah, we had the idea of doing like a like citizen science type of thing. I mean, again, these were really too big anyway, and like what we did was a lot anyway. But I think making space for, like in some cases it turned on almost a life history, some of the interviews did, and then on the other case, like Lauren did surveys that were like on a scale from like actually more quantitative surveys. So yeah, I guess it kind of just depended on the location, how many people we had that were contacts, and we all anticipated that the sample sizes would go down. I really liked photo voice because it is arts based and a little more interactive and allowed people to react to something more than just like seeing someone and talking. And like there's so much that you can convey through photo. Like there's so much symbolism and imagery that comes from that. And I still haven't even gone through all of the data yet, but yeah, that's a method that I heard about in the last year or so, and Martha also introduced it during our class, and it's been used in for people to portray their environmental risk perceptions in the past. So I don't know, I think it can be intentionally used. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Ame, and thank you, Rebecca. It was really nice to hear about these projects, and I hope it's stimulated some interest in the Rula Aries and Natura fellowships. And yeah, I guess Rebecca kind of dealt with this to some extent in her talk, but just one more question for you, Ame. Could you reflect on how relevant you think this experience was to your development of your dissertation project?
Yeah, this was really helpful. I think my first year was a lot of exploring and just wanting to do everything. And so this helped me focus. Even though we had 4 different topics, I knew the water narratives, and like understanding people's relationships with water was what really drew me. And so that's going to be the thread that ties all of my dissertation chapters together. And I'm hoping to take some of this work from the photo voice and use it for my comprehensive exams. We have a practical comprehensive, which is basically writing up an article. So the first paper basically would be coming out of this. So that was pretty exciting. And yeah, I mean, I wish I could go back and help with all the things that are happening there. They're working on a documentary and like all sorts of stuff in this area. I mean, it's a very active place. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe I'll get more funding to go back.
Great. Okay, we are 1 minute before time. You get 1 minute back. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to our speakers, Rebecca and Ame.
Good to see
Thank you.
Bye.